A new Eastern-inspired world to explore, dozens of fierce and deadly enemies to overcome, and one destined monkey with a magical bow staff. I've been playing Black Myth: Wukong for the past week, and after logging dozens of hours with the game, I'm convinced we have a new Game of the Year contender. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today I'm sharing our review of Game Science's action RPG, Black Myth: Wukong. To level set, we're only able to show you footage from the first 3 chapters of the game due to the developer's embargo restrictions, but honestly, that's fine, because the first few chapters are so jam-packed with everything that makes Black Myth: Wukong what it is, that we really don't need more to help drive the points home. So here's the headline. Black Myth: Wukong absolutely surprised me by not only being a beautiful looking game, but an incredibly competent one from a gameplay perspective. The action is tight, and the systems that feed into the moment-to-moment gameplay feel unique. I was also blown away by some of the cinematics. The visuals and the animations were exactly what you'd expect to see in a Final Fantasy quality game, and to have that level from a new developer is impressive. At the end of the day, what I found most clarifying was the fact that Black Myth: Wukong is closer to God of War than any Souls-like that's out there, and I, for one, loved almost every second of my time with the game. And that's really where I think we need to start, with a simple question. What is Black Myth: Wukong? Leading up to the launch, it wasn't clear to a vast majority of players what type of game this would be. To be clear, I think Game Science pulled from a few different genres, but ultimately, Black Myth is a tried and true action RPG. You play as the Destined One, and your goal is to find hidden relics scattered around the world that will bring back the true Monkey King, Sun Wukong. The game is separated into chapters, with each one presenting a strikingly different visual tone, while also introducing new enemies and mechanics into the mix. The team does some really smart things, like giving the player the ability to respec at any checkpoint for free. There's also a relatively flexible spell system, and by the end of my time with the game, I really enjoyed the offerings, which felt wildly different from that of other games. It all comes back to the core concept and the base material, Journey to the West, which provides such an interesting foundation and backdrop for the developers to create this game around, and 9 times out of 10, it works. To be clear, there are a few things about Black Myth: Wukong that I didn't like or I thought didn't work, and because media outlets have already been able to get their reviews posted, I did want to share my thoughts on those things first, so you could draw a comparison before you decide whether or not the game is worth buying. For starters, the game's story is a bit all over the place. To be fair, I don't know the source material, but from one moment to the next, there's really no cohesion. There are storylines within each chapter, but they're not told in a way that really allows you to connect all of the dots. I love the characters and the bosses we encountered because they almost all felt important, but if you were to ask me what the story was outside of that macro premise I mentioned before, I couldn't do it. Sort of sidecar to that is the voice acting, which isn't always great. There are some interactions where it's passable, and those moments are important because they don't break your immersion, but there are other encounters where the voice, be it the emphasis, tone, or inflection, just rip you right out of the moment. For a game that prides itself on so many cinematic storytelling moments, it's kind of a big deal. These two things aren't as big of an issue for me, but maybe they are for you, which is why I wanted to address them up front. I have noticed the game's also been blasted by other outlets as having loads of technical issues, and I feel a bit awkward here because I have yet to run into anything egregious. I've only had one hard crash in Chapter 2 over dozens of hours of game time, so the impact was next to nothing. There was a lot of chatter around performance in Chapter 3 and beyond, and again, I don't really have anything to add here. The fidelity of the game is incredible, and I worry that performance is going to vary, as it always does, depending on your system. Now, I'm running an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X, 128 gigs of DDR4 RAM, and an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 Ti. It is a solid computer, I'm not going to deny that, and throughout my time with the game, it handled every moment with relative ease. There are some fleeting moments where enemies or particles fly towards the camera, and I did notice a slight hit in my frame rates, but those moments were few and far between as well. Now, moving into some more gameplay-specific qualms, I want to talk about the world design. Visually, the game is stunning, and I have nothing but positive things to say about the themes of the world and the way that they're presented in the game. What I didn't always love was the actual design and layouts of the worlds themselves. Chapter 3 is where I really started to notice this. I found that the developers would overscale areas of the world, fill them with lesser enemies, and that didn't always translate to a great experience. It was cool from an exploration perspective, but oftentimes it would just be these big open areas with tons of enemies, and it would be a slog to cut them all down to size. Once this got a bit tedious, what do we do as gamers? Well, we just run through everything and avoid fighting, which I think is when I realized this was an issue. If I were to guess, the team just got a bit overzealous with their world design, always opting to go bigger rather than creating a more tailored experience for the player. Now, to be clear, Black Myth: Wukong is not an open world game by any stretch, but there are certain areas of each chapter that feel expansive, and exploring them will often have you encounter a mini-boss, discover a chest, or find some other secret. It's cool, and exactly how exploration should work in this type of game, but it wasn't always executed in a way that enhances the experience. My final gripe, and this one is relatively small, is with the gearing system. Black Myth features an incredibly linear gearing system where you kill a certain boss, obtain a new core material, and then you can craft either a new set of armor or weapon. There's no choice here, and I think that's my biggest issue. You simply want to craft the next thing because it's better across the board. There's nothing inherently wrong with this system, but every set of gear you craft does have a specific bonus associated with it, so you would hope there's flexibility to choose your armor based on your playstyle or specific need. But if you do that, you lose out on a ton of valuable defensive stats. To be clear, the system works, but it is uninspiring. Now, what I just outlined are 5 issues I had with the game. I wouldn't call them major by any stretch, and not a single one of those 5 issues stopped me from enjoying Black Myth. And I think that's the key, because being fully immersed in a promising new IP from a new developer far outshines anything negative we've just discussed, but it's important to be diligent. With the negative stuff out of the way, it's time to pivot and focus on what I liked about Black Myth: Wukong, and that list is expansive. The team gets a lot right, and for the most part, it aids in creating a better gameplay experience. I have to start with one of my favorite aspects of games in this genre, the boss fights. When you combine epic cinematic moments with really well-designed boss mechanics, you've got a recipe for success. Black Myth is chock full of fun and larger-than-life boss fights, and they can come quite literally out of nowhere. I would be walking through an area and then bam, big old boss fight out of nowhere. I really liked that, and I don't know what else there is to say because it was surprising. What made those moments matter though is that the boss fights themselves were really well designed. In terms of mechanics, I was impressed with just how much move variety some of the bosses had. And the major bosses, forget about it. They are intense. I know we're not in the same genre here, but you could have easily told me some of these fights were developed by FromSoft, and I would have believed you. They're that good. Boss fights do land on a spectrum though. Some are wickedly easy and you can blow through them in 1 or 2 shots. Others took me upwards of 2 hours to overcome. You could call that a balance thing, but the fights that needed to be hard were hard, and that's what I appreciated about them. Hand in hand with those boss fights were the cinematics, which I've already said blew me away. This is what happens when storytelling meets action, and it's the reason why there's such a clear line between a game like God of War and Black Myth: Wukong. I didn't count the number of cinematics in the game, but at almost every major beat, and many of the minor beats as well, there is a fully animated and voiced cinematic that sets up the fight, furthers the story, or builds some sort of tension. As I mentioned before, the only reason this aspect of the game doesn't get full points is because the storytelling is fragmented and the voice acting sometimes not great. In the moment, the story is captivating, but the dots never connect in a way that makes it easy to follow. But that's not to discredit the cinematic action, which is glorious. Now, everything I've talked about so far matters, but when it comes to analyzing a game, there's no more important factor than the moment-to-moment gameplay. I want to start and focus mainly on combat, because it's really the one thing that can make or break an action RPG. As I said before, Black Myth is an action game, and almost immediately, the combat leans into that genre. Your actions are fast and responsive, and oftentimes, you'll need to wail on an enemy to deal considerable amounts of damage. This is all made better by the game's spells and skills, which perfectly accompany that action. One of my favorite things about the game is the first spell that you get, Immobilize, which really sets the tone because I wasn't expecting it. This becomes a core tenet of the combat throughout the entire game, allowing you to strategically freeze enemies and bosses in place, opening up different attacks. The Destined One can also tap into different fighting stances, and while I thought these were gimmicky to start, I ended up changing up my build multiple times throughout my playthrough. Smash Stance was a great all-around option that allowed me to remain mobile for encounters that were more defensively demanding. Pillar Stance is truly unique and allows you to perch on the top of your staff using stamina to avoid direct melee attacks below, before unleashing your own attack. Then there's Thrust Stance, which magically extends the reach of your staff, giving you some powerful poke potential. I played around with each stance and would often respec depending on the fight I was currently trying to overcome, and I have to hand it to the team because they make it easy to just wipe the slate clean and rebuild your character. It's also a testament to the balancing of the skills that I even felt the need to change things up, which isn't always the case with other games. Every spell you unlock and transformation you discover becomes something you can invest in with the Spark system or skill point system. By the end of the game, you've got more than enough tools to build out the Destined One however you choose, and it really does come down to your playstyle and the obstacle you're trying to overcome. One thing I just enjoyed about the game was the diversity in the abilities, which for the most part felt incredibly unique. Baseline, your only defensive option is to dodge, which is great for a fast-paced martial arts themed game, but spells like Rock Solid add parry functionality to your kit. Because each spell slot is limited to a certain type of spell, you are forced to make decisions within a small pool of abilities. Would it have been nice to equip any spell in any slot? Sure, but that's just not the way the game is designed, and each spell enhances a specific aspect of the combat. Now, I'm compelled to spend a little time talking about the transformation spells and the spirits, which are two distinctly different things, but end up occupying a similar space. Transformations allow you to change your form into a version of a powerful enemy you've defeated before in the game. If you kill a boss early on in Chapter 1, you can unlock your first transformation, but over the course of the game, you will unlock more. Each time you transform, you have access to a new moveset, as well as a new health bar, and this has quite literally saved me on multiple occasions. These transformations are powerful spells that can often determine the outcome of a fight, and I can't think of another game that's utilized a system quite like this. In a similar vein are spirits. Throughout the world, there are other enemies that you can defeat and absorb their spirit. By equipping that spirit, you gain a passive bonus, but can also call on the spirit to initiate a one-off ability, based on that enemy's moveset. Again, if you defeat an early mini-boss, you will have access to this system within the first few hours, but along the way, it's almost impossible to miss the glowing blue enemies that indicate a spirit is within reach. Combat top to bottom is what sold me on the game. It is fast-paced, responsive, and the variety of spells and abilities really helps Black Myth: Wukong stand apart from similar games that just went to the same old bag of tricks. When the action is at its absolute best is when your character's moveset is being pushed to its limit against a challenging boss or enemy, and that cathartic feeling that washes over you when you defeat a formidable opponent never dissipates throughout the entirety of the game. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is exploration, which ended up being a much bigger aspect of the game than I originally thought. In Chapter 1, there is some light exploration, but overall the maps are relatively small and linear. However, once you get into Chapter 2, things expand tenfold. I was truly taken aback by this, but I welcome the exploration. The team's striking visuals, coupled with the capabilities of Unreal Engine 5, make exploring the world a joy, made better by the secret encounters and moments scattered throughout the world. Again, I do point to some of the scaling issues with the world design because this is where it rears its head. Some areas certainly felt a bit too big with not enough incentive to explore at all, but there are secrets to be found and interactions to uncover, and it's entirely possible you miss them by simply not exploring. There's also the right amount of checkpoints that always guarantee you aren't losing hours of progression. It's a subtle thing, but the wrong placement would make some of these areas almost unbearable, but because death is quick and you're often not far from where you started, the system ends up aiding in the process of adventure. Black Myth: Wukong is a world I want to explore, and while you're not searching out weapons and armor the way you might in another game, you're still finding enough valuable things and people that your exploration feels rewarded. At the end of the day, my feelings about Black Myth: Wukong can be summarized plainly. This game is a clear Game of the Year contender, and you'll regret not playing it because it will go down as one of 2024's biggest titles. Its unique premise, stunning visual fidelity, and cinematic moments pair perfectly with responsive combat, a diverse array of skills and abilities, and a progression system that doesn't limit the player, but empowers them. The game isn't perfect, and I don't want you to go into it thinking that it is, but it is damn impressive for a new studio introducing a new IP to a global audience, and I think the team has a lot to be proud of, and players across the world are truly in for a treat. Black Myth Wukong is available on PC and PS5 with the eventual release on Xbox Series X and S happening sometime in the future. If you enjoyed this review, you know what to do. Hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing because you better believe we'll have more Black Myth coming your way in the days and weeks ahead. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.